I'm Rebecca Seitz, and this is Right to Life. There's a debate tactic called Gish Gallop. Gish, like fish, but it starts with a G. Gallop, like a horse. In the Gish Gallop technique, the person tries to overwhelm the other one by bringing up a ton of arguments, even though most or all of them are untrue. By overwhelming someone with untruths, they're able to get in and out of the conversation and look like their position is the victorious one. Now listen, if you're a mom, you know the Gish Gallop technique. Remember when your kiddo wanted a video game, or to get a cell phone, or have access to the internet, and your mama heart sped up because you know all the danger and the craziness that can get to them if you say yes to any of those things too early. Remember how your kiddo threw a million reasons at you all at once? All my friends have a cell phone. Nothing's going to happen to me. You can monitor what I do anyway. I won't ask for anything else all year. I'll clean my bedroom every week. I'll do the dishes every night. I won't download anything that I shouldn't. You're a mom. You know that not a one of those things is true. But they're coming at you so quickly, all you can do is either let your kid go until they run out of air, or hold up your hand and seize the barrage. Then say your piece calmly and rationally and end the discussion. When a kid uses Gish Gallop on an adult, it's ineffective. But something happens when an adult uses Gish Gallop on adults, especially in the political space. It works. It really does. President Trump employs it with incredible alacrity. His answer to questions, be they from reporters or debate moderators, are laden with falsehoods, but they come so quickly, the person who asks the question is hard-pressed to latch onto any of them long enough to discuss them to full fruition. Because President Trump has employed this tactic so successfully, and listen, I'm sure politicians before him have as well, that's just the one I'm familiar with because this is the age we're living in, but because he's employed it so successfully, others have picked up on it, and a lot of them are in my former community, the politically active evangelical community. You are about to hear my conversation with Sam Sorbo, a Gish Galloper. Now, before we get to the discussion, I need to disclose some personal backstory in the interest of full disclosure. If you listened to episode 1, then you know some of my decades-long background in the evangelical and pro-life movements. You also know that I began seriously questioning my lifelong identity in evangelicalism back in 2016, and I formally announced my departure from it a year later via the Freevangelic website and podcast. At this point in my life, 7 years after imploding mine and my little family's world with that announcement on Freevangelic, it feels like all of my friends from the evangelical bubble know, and they've made their decisions about whether or not to continue friendship with me. But my experience with the Sorbos proved me wrong in that belief. Kevin Sorbo and I became friends maybe a decade ago when I was the head of a nonprofit, interfaith, film and television development studio. You may know of Kevin for his role as Hercules from back in the day. If you're an evangelical Christian, you might more recently know him as one of the stars in the God's Not Dead franchise, or the film Let There Be Light, which he did with Sean Hannity. Kevin has stayed in my home here in Naples. He's laughed with my husband and kids, headlined film events that I threw. I even helped my mother book him to speak at the annual fundraiser for the Crisis Pregnancy Center that she led, so he stayed in my little Tennessee hometown too. Before last month, though, the last communication that I had with Kevin was on August 24th, 2017, and that was project-related. So when I got an email from a friend alerting me to the formation of a new political action committee here in Florida, The name Sorbo was not top of my mind. But when I clicked the link, a video of Sam Sorbo began playing. She was talking about Amendment 4, about why it should be defeated, and the things she was saying made my eyebrows raise. So I decided to reach out to Kevin by text. I wrote, "Hey Kevin, been a while since we've talked. I've been reading and watching you and Sam's take on Amendment 4. Not sure if you're aware, I've been doing a podcast show about it, Right to Life, with the goal of just getting info into voters' hands. I'm not party affiliated. I'm truly one of those annoying people who votes each issue as I understand it, regardless of party platforms. I wonder if you or Sam might want to come on and talk over your concerns about the amendment." Four days later, Kevin responded with 5 words. "Sam will be in touch." Sam did indeed text me the next day. We arranged a time for her to talk with me about Amendment 4 and her objections to it. Welcome to our conversation. Sam Sorbo, welcome to the Right to Life show. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So I've been Googling you lately because, of course, I know Kevin and have worked on stuff with Kevin.
I didn't feel a thing.
And so the phrase that I keep running across is education freedom fighter. Is that okay to say?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. But you are very involved in the conversation here in Florida about Amendment 4, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
absolutely.
That was why I reached out to Kevin, who very kindly was like, "Yes, I will connect you to Sam." So please thank him for me.
Will do.
So as I've shared with you right before we were recording, this is just an informational show. I'm not big on telling people how to vote, though you are welcome, of course, to share, how you think that people should vote. But I, as the host of the show, am just here to talk about it and share information and let people figure it out from there. So let's, in that vein, if we can start with, what I know you do object to Amendment 4, right?
That's correct.
And so tell us the reasons behind the objection.
There are several, but the number one is it's an amendment to our Constitution. Mm-hmm. So it will change and make permanent what it states. The second problem is it doesn't say much. What it says is so vague, it's going to lead to any number of lawsuits. And the third part is it contradicts parental consent, which is a law in Florida. And so they're thinking about amending the Constitution to contradict the rights that parents have to consent to surgical or medical procedures on their own children. And I really struggle with that because I'm an education freedom advocate, which means that I fight for the rights of parents to educate their children and in the way that they see fit, right? And so anything that comes up against that and says, no, the parents can know, but they can't actually be asked to consent. They don't need to be asked to consent. I mean, my biggest problem, and this is just sort of a personal thing for me with Amendment 4, is it gives cover for child predators. So I've been telling people, how about you make some signs and pick it outside and say, save a child predator, vote yes on 4, or preserve pedophilia, vote yes on 4, because that's really what this does. It just offers a whole bunch of cover fire for people who want to take advantage of minors.
Did you catch the gallop? The amendment is an amendment. The amendment is vague. The amendment contradicts parental consent. The amendment gives cover for child predators. The first falsehood there is that the amendment is vague. It isn't. The second is that it contradicts parental consent. It doesn't. And the third is that it gives cover for child predators. I am not a debater. And until I looked it up after the conversation that you're now listening to, I did not know that the Gish-Gallop technique even existed. So I responded only to that final falsehood, the one about Amendment 4 giving cover to child predators.
So how does it, let me read the amendment. I've read it on the show a few times, but it's 2 sentences. It says, no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability, or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. And then I think what you're alluding to is the second sentence, which says this amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. So help me connect those dots, and our listeners connect those dots to how do those 2 sentences give cover for pedophiles to get to minors? I guess they would
Well,
only
what's
be interested.
notification? It's not consent.
So I asked an attorney about that. The way that he explained it to me, which I did not know prior to asking him, was that in the state of Florida, and please correct me if you know differently, in the state of Florida, no amendment to the Constitution can do more than one thing. It can't serve multiple purposes. Like when we pass laws and they can have pork in them, amendments can't do that. And so that sentence, the current law in the state of Florida is that minors can't have abortions without parental consent. So that sentence was included to say we're not trying to impact any of the laws regarding parents and their notification or their consent, because that's the existing law and the amendment is not trying to do anything with regard to that. That's
Then
what
why
he
doesn't
told
it
me.
say that?
The way he explained it, and that's what I wanted to get into with you, is the way he explained it was it can't, because if it did, then it could be construed as an amendment trying to do 2 things. And the amendment can only do one thing. So what the amendment's trying to do is in sentence 1, which is allow for abortion up to fetal viability.
What is viability?
22 to 24 weeks. We had Dr. Brothers on to go over that the other day.
Are you sure?
Yeah, that's what I'm not sure. I'm not an OB, but Dr. Betsy Brothers came on, I don't know, a couple episodes ago.
Then why doesn't it say 22 to 24 weeks? Why does it say viability?
Well, I asked the attorney about that, and he said back when Roe was decided, that viability
was decided for in 72,
yes,
was decided against? Okay. Back
Originally.
in 1972.
Yes. That viability at that point was around 30 to 36 weeks, which is another thing that Dr. Brothers said. She actually alluded to maybe one of the Kennedy babies died at 36 weeks, which is interesting because my son was born at 36 weeks. So that was alarming to learn. But of course, our technology has progressed. And so now we've gotten it to where we can keep a baby alive, even if it's 22, 23, 24 weeks coming out of the womb, that it's different. That little window is different with every pregnancy, depending on how the baby developed. And that's why they can't say 22 weeks or 23 or 24, because it's depending on how fast the baby has developed. But that it is standard in medical practice that fetal viability is 22 to 24 weeks right now. But that was why they explained to me why they used the term fetal viability, because it could get even further back as our technology progresses. So if it's only up to fetal viability, I read the amendment to say it's only up to fetal viability. And that's 22 to 24 weeks. But then I read some of the objections that say, no, it allows abortion willy-nilly all the way up until day of birth. And so I'm trying to connect the dots in my mind. If you can connect them for me, how do we go from fetal viability is 22 to 24 weeks, and that's what's in the amendment, to no, it allows it all the way up to birth? What's the mechanism that's doing that?
I don't know, except there's no definition for fetal viability. It's just a word. And so what you're saying is, well, the common consensus is that viability is defined as, but it's not. It's not.
Law,
some people say viability. Well, define the word viability. Able to live outside the womb? Why don't they just say that? Able to live outside the womb. And then the question is, well, who's determining that? The doctor that wants to abort the baby, or a doctor who's pro-life and doesn't want to abort the baby? Because some doctors will keep a baby alive and other doctors won't. In the state of Minnesota, they've been doing post-birth abortions. And the only reason that they don't, quote, do post-birth abortions anymore is because the governor of Minnesota said, stop reporting on those. So now there's no reports that they're doing them.
So she just galloped from the topic at hand, fetal viability, which is a clearly understood medical term, to asking why they use the term, even though I just explained why they used the term, to then question who is determining fetal viability, even though I also just explained it is a medical term that is medically known, to placing importance on the doctor's political position regarding abortion, which has nothing to do with Amendment 4, to claiming that post-birth abortion happens, which is a lie and also has nothing to do with Amendment 4.
The problem is, if you're not for the child inside the womb, you cannot make the argument that you're for the child outside the womb. It's a child. It's always a child. From conception on, it is a human child. It's not a puppy. If it were a puppy, there probably would be stronger laws about abortion. I'm kidding. But if it were a toaster, then that would be something else. It's not. The only reason that we're having this discussion is because it is a human being.
Now she's galloped to the subject of when life begins. If you've listened to the episode with Dr. Rebecca Todd Peters, then you know that the biblical position is that potential life, a fetus, that's the medical term for a baby in the womb, does not equate to actual life. See Exodus 21, which requires a different punishment for killing a pregnant woman than if she is hit and only miscarries. You also know that actual life begins with the breath of life, according to the Bible. See Genesis 2:7. It reads, "Then the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." That man became a living soul comes after breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Soul life started with breath of life, according to Genesis 2:7.
And viability is a very difficult term because it's not defined.
And now we're back to fetal viability.
And let's face it, a comatose patient is not viable. So why don't we just kill all the coma patients in the world? If we're talking just viability, right? What about the person who just severed their spinal cord? Are they worth saving? They're not really viable at that point, but we have medical technology that can save them, but maybe no, maybe it's not worth it. This is the struggle that we have with the fact that now the government is providing for healthcare, right? Because the government is trying to save money. So pretty soon it'll be like, well, we can't really afford that kind of health procedure for you.
Gotcha.
So viability, the struggle with Amendment 4 is that it is so loosey-goosey that it can be interpreted in many different ways, and it will just open up a morass of legal issues because it is so indeterminate, undefined.
Coma patients, quadra or paraplegics, government health care, loosey-goosey amendment, interpretations, morass of issues. That's a lot of galloping.
That term, do you mean the fetal viability term is?
All the terms. No restrictions, it says, right? No restrictions on abortion, something like that?
It says, no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability, or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider.
Hold on.
That's the whole sentence.
It will not restrict abortion before viability.
Right, meaning you can't have an abortion after the baby is viable. It can't restrict, it has to allow abortion before viability. So the
Right.
cutoff
So
for
the
abortion.
before viability.
So if it cannot
Right.
exist outside the womb, then
Right.
this amendment would allow for abortion.
Florida is one of the most pro-life states. If we pass an amendment to our Constitution, which is basically permanent, you're not going to go back and reconfigure the Constitution willy-nilly. This is a very difficult thing. This shouldn't even be on the ballot. This kind of thing really should not be a ballot issue. We have legislators who pass laws that are crafted to go through a system of checks and balances before they're signed into law. There's a whole procedure for creating law. And to do this to the voters and force this upon the voters to make a decision on a very nebulous, very, very craftily worded amendment to the Constitution, it's not even a law, it's an amendment to the Constitution, there's something wrong with it. It's very sneaky. It's very sneaky. And the fact that it has to do with abortion is like, okay, what are you trying to do to me? Why are you trying to, clearly this is trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. And it's hard to figure out because it's so craftily worded and so nebulous. So before viability is because anybody can argue anything about viable, not viable. The fact is that the majority of Americans don't believe in abortion before, I can't remember what it is. It's before 15 weeks. So it's not really close to viable or not viable. It's, look, you find out you're pregnant, you should make a decision right away. Because as Bill Clinton used to say, and this used to be the standpoint of the Democrat Party, was safe, legal, rare. Right? But now it's no, all abortions all the time. They put a bus outside the Democrat National Convention to offer abortions, and they killed 25 babies outside the Democrat National Convention.
First, she misrepresented what restrictions Amendment 4 places on abortion. The amendment allows abortion up to the point of fetal viability. Then she shifted to an argument that the Constitution should not be amended at all. Then it went to an argument about how laws should be changed through the legislature. But a constitutional amendment initiated by the will of the people and voted on directly by the people is pretty much the very essence of democracy at work. So how is that bad? Especially in the eyes of a self-proclaimed freedom advocate. The next pivot was to the amendment being craftily worded and sneaky. It isn't. It's 2 clearly written sentences. I've read them to her in this very discussion. Then she galloped back to viability, which we've already established is indeed a clearly known and understood medical term. And then it was invoking Bill Clinton, wanting abortion to be rare, and we capped off that little jaunt with a claim that the DNC was having abortions performed outside its venue. That's 7 gallops. Listen, I'll say it again. I did not know, and I had never interacted with the Gish Gallop before this. I could only respond in the moment to the last thing that she said.
Seriously? There was a bus where they were performing abortions in a bus? This is the first I'm hearing of this.
Okay, before we get back into this crazy ride, you need to know something. And it's important because I have spent my career calling for the responsible use of mass media. And it would be wholly irresponsible of me not to address Sam's statement of, quote, they put a bus outside the Democrat National Convention to offer abortions. And look, maybe she's just confused. There has, after all, been a lot of running around here. So here are the facts. There was an organization, Planned Parenthood Great Rivers, which is based in St. Louis, that had a mobile medical unit in Chicago's West Loop neighborhood. It was not affiliated with the DNC at all. The DNC held its nighttime events at the United Center, which is not in the West Loop. It's blocks away. The DNC held its daytime events over at the McCormick Place Convention Center, and that is miles away from the West Loop. So these two things are not working in tandem. This was not an effort of the Democrat Party or its convention. Now saddle up, friend. Let's get back to it.
Oh, no, absolutely. And free vasectomies. They're the party of anti-children. They don't believe in children. Like they hate children. But our culture hates children, let's face it. There's so much that we do that's against children in this culture. But yes, they've made their position very clear. So you and I are sitting here and we're pro-life, and all I'm saying is, what are they up to?
Well, let me ask, I was going to ask you that because, when people are sneaky, it's because they have a hidden agenda, right? What's the agenda? What do you think
Killing
it is?
babies is the agenda.
Killing
Killing
what does
babies
that
is
get
the
them?
agenda. Child sacrifice. That's their what's the word I'm looking for? Their worship service is child sacrifice. That's their holy grail. That's their Eucharist.
So you think it really is a lust to kill children?
Yeah, unfortunately, at the seat of it, it is. Now, there are a lot of misguided people who think, well, this is about freedom, bodily autonomy. Those are the same people who are for mandating vaccines, by the way, which is a complete degradation of bodily autonomy when somebody forces you to insert anything into your body. And and by the way, same thing, if we forcibly provided abortions, we should also be upset about that, right? Mm-hmm. But these people are saying, no, I can do this. Basically, I can hire somebody to do this to myself. Also, there's another part that's nebulous in the amendment that is healthcare provider.
All right, Gallup won there, vaccine mandates, which have nothing to do with Amendment 4. Gallup 2, forcing women to undergo abortion, which also has nothing to do with Amendment 4. Gallup 3, defining healthcare provider. Now this one is actually pertinent to Amendment 4.
That one I looked up because I had heard the objection. That's actually not true. Healthcare provider is a defined term in Florida law. Florida Statutes Title 29, Public Health Section 381.026 is the Florida Patients' Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. And it says it's very short. It says healthcare provider means a physician licensed under Chapter 458, an osteopathic physician licensed under Chapter 459, or a pediatric physician licensed under Chapter 46.1. So they're all licensed by the state.
Why does it not say licensed physician then? Why does it say healthcare provider? Because healthcare provider is a term that can be changed.
What do you mean
all
change?
Of these, they can redefine. They'll go back to the Florida law and they'll say, hey, you know what? Eyelash techs are people who provide healthcare. Dermatologists provide healthcare. Your acupuncturist provides healthcare. They'll change the definition of a healthcare provider. That's why they didn't actually say a physician, a licensed medical physician. They didn't say that. Mm-hmm. They said a healthcare provider. That's the problem is like you can look up the terms, but the terms can change their definitions.
She's galloping, but I think there's an important point to consider here. Sam is saying she fears that the state is going to license lash technicians to perform abortions. Does she really believe that? And if she does believe that the Florida state government would license eyelash technicians to perform abortions, how does she also believe that state should have a say in her, my, or any woman's healthcare choices? Those two ideas are incompatible.
Because look, I wrote a whole book on it. You can see this, your listeners can't.
Words for Warriors is the book.
Words for Warriors is a book about the words that they've taken and changed the meanings of, like woman. And so you go, but it's a healthcare provider. And I looked up the definition. Well, bully for you. I used to know what a woman was, but now we have a Supreme Court justice who doesn't know what a woman is. And she pretends to be one. And she was nominated because she is one.
She's selling you her book, which is not about Amendment 4. She's bringing up gender dysphoria, which is also not about Amendment 4. I tried to get us back on track.
So the concern there is really what could happen after the fact. Is that what I'm hearing? It's that, sure, we know what healthcare provider means right now. It's defined, but that could be redefined later in the law.
Yes. And the concern really is why? Why do we need this amendment? Why?
Well,
we're limping along just fine right now. What's the argument for putting in a very nebulous, oddly worded amendment to the Constitution?
I can tell you that what I'm being told. Why I'm being told is because there are some women, and we've interviewed some of them on the show, that, without access to abortion, they would be dead. Their current children would be without a mom, or they would have lost their fertility. Like we shared one story of a woman who she already had 2 children, got pregnant with a third. It was an ectopic. She had to have DNC. She had
that ectopics don't count as abortion.
Oh, they meet the definition of abortion, but the law wasn't in place. This was years ago. So she got the abortion, and then exactly 1 year later had her third child. And so her reason for we need this amendment was, I would be dead if I hadn't had access to abortion, and under the current 6-week ban, she wouldn't have had access. So that's that, and to me, that is a very compelling story and argument to hear. And we've had other women like that on the show where they're like, look, I didn't want to have an abortion. I had to have an abortion or I would be dead. Or like one woman had multiples and one of them had a chromosomal abnormality that was going to spark a spontaneous miscarriage, and she would have lost all the babies. So she had to have a selective reduction, which is an abortion. Talk about, euphemisms. That's an abortion, a selective reduction, to save the other babies. And that's how she's got the daughter that she has today, is because she aborted one of them so that she could carry to term. So I am troubled that I'm like you in that I don't want the government involved in my family decisions, period. And this does feel a lot like the government getting involved in my family decisions. And that part has confused me, if you can speak to it, of why is it that we share the same values of we don't want the government involved in all of these things. You're an education freedom advocate until it comes to this. Like, I don't feel like there's protection in getting the government involved in this choice. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
The government tells people not to murder you. You're okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah. This is murder. And the government is telling people not to murder these little tiny people. And I'm okay with that. And I don't like people messing with that, because when we say it's okay to murder little tiny people, that's just the first step in it's okay to murder people. It's okay to murder old people. It's okay to murder people you don't like. It's okay to murder.
Okay, can we sit with this idea for a moment? Because I think it is a core issue for many of us. Dr. Peters educated me to the reality that life in the womb is a process. The Bible does not recognize it as a life, as evidenced by the fact that the Old Testament says if you hit a pregnant woman and kill the unborn fetus, the law of a life for a life does not apply. There is a punishment, though, because a loss of potential life must be acknowledged, but not a loss of actual life, not according to the Bible. No, the Bible says life starts with breath. God breathed the breath of life into the man he'd created, and at that moment, the moment of breath, his creation had a soul. It had life. God himself allows for 60% of fertilized eggs to naturally not make it to birth. Do you remember that from our discussion with Dr. Peters? That doesn't show us a God who is concerned with a fertilized egg getting to birth even the majority of the time. So I had to ask myself, why is Sam more concerned about getting fertilized eggs to birth than God? Why is she placing more value on those potential lives than the actual life of the woman? How could any of us take that position and call ourselves for life?
And that's the struggle. This amendment in particular is so nebulous. It's very difficult for me to pinpoint where it's going to go wrong. I just know it's going to go wrong. And so to move from 6 weeks to this, no restrictions, no restrictions. What does that mean?
There are restrictions. The restriction is up to viability.
Right, but no restrictions after that.
No, before that. There are no restrictions on, if the amendment passed. The amendment says no restrictions on abortion until viability.
Right, and then no
restricted.
restrictions.
No, then it's restricted. Here, let me read it again. No law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability. So that's up until the point of viability.
Right. No restriction before viability.
Before viability. So
at
that 22 to 24
the language
week
itself
mark
is confusing, but there are no restrictions on abortion before viability. So any abortion at any time before, quote, viability, we don't know when that is. It's nebulous because you can't actually pinpoint viability, and no restrictions. I'm just saying, like it's a very oddly worded, nebulous. The problem is we just don't know. I can't tell. It's confusing in the fact that it's so strangely worded that I can't predict how it's going to go wrong. I just see it going wrong, and I don't see the point in amending the Constitution. It makes me very skeptical. It does. It makes me skeptical. And that's why, and of course I'm skeptical. I'm pro-life.
Me too.
So right now I'm sitting kind of pretty. We still have abortion. We still allow abortion. But it seems to me that this is going to usher in all kinds of issues that we just don't need in the state of Florida. Do you know what? Ultimately, I don't care what your definition of viable is. Life begins at conception. We should not be trying to snuff it out. That's a bad thing to do. And it's bad for the mother. It's bad for the child, but it's also bad for the mother. And we so seldom talk about the repercussions to the mother and the father, by the way. Like, let's just ignore the father, right? How do you emasculate a man faster than by telling him he has no right of decision-making over his unborn child? Oh, let's just take all of his power away. That just decimates the male population. You're no good but to use women to service your sexual desires. Boy, that just saps them of all their purpose. And that's why, by the way, like 33%, a full third, I just read, of young men who are of sexually active age are not engaged in sexual activity. They just give up. They're just not even interested. They'll go to the porn or they'll go on their games and they won't even try. And I'm just saying, like, that's sad. Not that everybody should be out having all the sex.
I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, didn't we tell them to stop having sex? So I'm not sure that's
No. We want them to want to have sex so that they want to get married so that they can pursue a relationship, because it's in the relationship that they find their purpose. For women too, it's in the relationship that we find our purpose. It's in service of others that we find our value. And so if we're not in the business of relationship and service, then it's very difficult for us to find value. And we need to have value. We need to know that we have value.
Do you mean in marriage when you say relationship?
Yeah, but any relationship, like relationship. But in this particular
for the guys
case,
having sex.
if we're talking about sex, then yeah. So it used to be that women held the bar high and men tried to reach it. And that was their purpose. Their purpose was to get a job, become worthy so that they could merit a marriage. They could merit the sex. Mm-hmm. And they were driven. And now they're not driven. And they're not driven for two reasons. They can have all the sex they want. And so now it's like, well, why? So then they just go on and porn is readily available and it's highly addictive, like a drug. It literally acts like a drug on the brain. And so they just go and have they just ignore and why? Because relationships are hard. Mm-hmm. It's not easy, but it's worth it. But it's definitely not easy. So you can't kind of blame them for giving up. But if only women shut the gate a little bit, like make it a little bit more challenging, shall we? Mm-hmm. And then see what happens.
This has been a long ride. None of that had anything to do with Amendment 4. Let's just see if we can get this horse to the barn.
Well, I told you we would only go half an hour. We went over it, and I'm very sorry about that. But thank you very much for coming on Right to Life and talking about some of these things. Is there anything that I didn't ask? Anything that's important for those voters to think about when they go in that voting booth and decide how to vote on this amendment?
Well, I would like them to vote no, and the reason is because it's amending the Constitution of Florida. And it will be a bellwether for the rest of the states. And I think it's a very dangerous, because we can't really make a good definition of it. I think it's just a very dangerous thing. So there's that.
Thank you, Sam, for coming on.
Yeah, much success with this. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
In my conversation with Sam, who is a spokesperson for why to vote no on Amendment 4 and an advisory board member of Keep Florida Pro-Life, I was told that the words used in the amendment are nebulous, but they are not. And we know that because we literally asked an attorney practicing in the state of Florida who is not affiliated with either political party. And we asked an actual OBGYN. I was told that it allows for pedophilia. It does not. I was told that it allows for abortion with no restrictions, and that is not true. I was told that it removes parental notification and consent requirements, and that is not true. And she steered us down a whole lot of trails that had nothing at all to do with Amendment 4. Look, I asked Sam to come on this show so that I could get more information. I want to make an informed vote on this amendment that reflects my bedrock value of protecting life. I want to give you information so that you can make an informed vote on this amendment. Instead, I got my first experience with a gish gallop. maybe you're realizing you've been taken on one of those rides too. Pretty soon, you're going to walk up to the doors of a polling place. An election worker will guide you to a ballot booth, kind of like a farmer guides a horse to the water. The thing is, you can take a horse to water all day long. It's up to the horse whether she drinks.
You've been listening to Right to Life on the 1C Story Network. If you have a story to share or would like to learn more, please visit righttolifestories.com. This show is brought to you by the generous support of people who value life. To contribute, visit righttolifestories.com or get in touch.
The 1C Story Network, for the love of stories.